She rode at the head of 20,000 warriors, her sword gleaming in the sun, her armor blackened with the dust of battle. Cities trembled at the sound of her war drums, and kings knelt before her might. To be loved by Amina was to embrace death. To oppose her was to be crushed beneath her iron heel. For nearly 4 decades, she ruled not with diplomacy, but with the sharp edge of her blade. This is the story of Queen Amina of Zazzau, the queen who conquered, ruled, and ultimately fell into legend. Amina was born into power, yet she was never meant to rule. She came into the world in the early 16th century as the daughter of Bakwa Turunku, the ruler of Zazzau, a prosperous Hausa kingdom in present-day northern Nigeria. Her mother, a fierce and intelligent queen, governed with wisdom, ensuring that Zazzau thrived through trade, diplomacy, and military strength. From the moment of her birth, Amina's fate was sealed, not as a mere princess to be married off for alliances, but as a force of nature destined to shake the foundations of West Africa. As a child, she was unlike other royal daughters, who were trained in courtly etiquette in marriage politics. Instead, she was drawn to the clashing of steel in the royal barracks, the harsh cries of warriors in training, the scent of sweat and blood in the air. Her father noticed her fierce spirit and, against tradition, allowed her to train with his warriors. By the time she was 16, Amina was wielding a sword as skillfully as any seasoned soldier. She was taller than most men, her body hardened by years of training, her hands calloused from gripping weapons. Unlike her siblings, who learned the art of diplomacy, Amina learned the art of war. She was never meant to rule, but fate had other plans. When Bakwa Turunku died, Amina's brother, Karama, was crowned king. He ruled peacefully for 10 years, content with maintaining the kingdom's stability. But Amina was not satisfied with peace. She longed for conquest, for expansion, for battle. She had spent years leading small raiding parties into enemy lands, testing her strategies, sharpening her instincts. When Karama died, Amina seized the throne, crushing any opposition with ruthless efficiency. She had no patience for negotiations or long council meetings. She saw herself not as a ruler confined by courtly politics, but as a warlord whose sole purpose was to expand Zazzau's dominion. Her first act as queen was to mobilize the greatest army the Hausa states had ever seen. With an army of 20,000 cavalry and countless foot soldiers, Queen Amina unleashed war upon her neighbors. She was relentless, conquering lands one after another, leaving smoldering ruins and broken warriors in her wake. Under her rule, Zazzau became an empire, its borders stretching as far as the Niger River to the west and Kano to the east. She built fortified walls around every conquered city, a legacy that would last for centuries. These walls, known as Ganuwar Amina, Amina's walls, stood as grim reminders of her dominion. They were not just physical barriers, but symbols of submission. Once Amina built her walls around your city, it meant you were hers, forever. To keep her army sharp, Amina never allowed a moment of peace. She ensured that her warriors remained battle-hardened, marching them into endless wars, expanding the empire until the name of Zazzau became synonymous with terror. And yet, for all her strength, there was one thing Amina feared: love. It is said that Amina took lovers from the land she conquered, handsome warriors, noblemen, even rival princes. But for them, it was a love that burned only for a night. By dawn, they were dead, their throats slit, their bodies discarded like broken swords. Amina had no use for alliances forged through marriage. She knew that love made rulers weak, that the heart was a battlefield more treacherous than any war. She refused to let any man claim power through her, so she made sure they never lived to tell the tale. This was not mere cruelty, it was survival. The Hausa courts were filled with ambitious men who would have sought to use her marriage to control her. But Amina would not be controlled. She would never be a wife, never be tamed. And so she reigned alone. For years, Amina was unstoppable. But even the fiercest warrior can bleed, and even the mightiest ruler can fall. It is said that her downfall came not from an enemy army, nor from betrayal within her court, but from something far more insidious: exhaustion. Decades of ceaseless war had drained her warriors, stretched her resources thin. The lands she conquered became restless, their people eager to break free from her iron grip. Then one fateful battle changed everything. Legend tells of a campaign deep into the lands of the Nupe people, a kingdom that had resisted her for years. The battle was fierce, unlike any she had fought before. Amina, clad in her signature armor, led her army into the fray, her sword carving through enemies like a scythe through grain. But something went wrong. Amid the chaos, Amina was surrounded. Her warriors, weary from years of endless war, could not break through the enemy lines in time. The warrior queen, who had never known defeat, found herself trapped. The details of what happened next remain shrouded in mystery. Some say she was captured and executed, her body left unburied as a warning to those who would dare to conquer. Others say she took her own life, refusing to be taken prisoner, her final words echoing through the battlefield. "I must conquer or die." And then silence. To this day, Queen Amina's legacy remains etched into the land she once ruled. The walls she built still stand in some places, whispering tales of a queen who refused to bow. Her name is sung in old Hausa songs, her legend passed from generation to generation. But her story does not end here. The dust had long settled on the empire she built. The fires of war had faded, the blood that soaked the fields had dried, and the warriors who once followed her into battle had either perished or disappeared into history. But Queen Amina was not forgotten. For centuries, stories of her reign spread across the lands of the Hausa people, passed down in hushed tones and bold songs, in whispers of fear and admiration. Some called her a tyrant, others a hero. Some claimed she was not dead at all, that her spirit still roamed the lands she conquered, seeking vengeance for a throne lost to time. But the question remained, how did the greatest warrior queen of West Africa meet her end? And why even now does she refuse to rest? No single account of Amina's final days exists. Some historians argue that she died peacefully in the twilight of her reign, worn down by the weight of endless war. Others claim she perished on the battlefield, her body unclaimed, lost among the fallen soldiers she had led into battle. Yet the most chilling tales tell a different story altogether, one of betrayal, of curses, of a fate worse than death. The Nupe people, one of the last enemies she faced, were known for their cunning and sorcery. Some say that when Amina's army stormed their lands, the Nupe priest wove a spell that would bring ruin upon the queen. It is whispered that one night, as she sat in her war tent, preparing for the final assault, a shadow crept into her camp. The next morning, Amina was gone. Not dead, not wounded, just gone. Her soldiers searched the battlefield, the forests, the rivers, but her body was never found. Did she fall in battle? Her corpse lost in the carnage? Did she escape, living out her last days in exile, stripped of her power? Or, perhaps the most terrifying possibility, did the gods themselves intervene, taking Amina as punishment for her ruthless conquests? As the years passed, strange stories began to emerge. Villagers spoke of ghostly hoofbeats thundering across the plains on moonless nights, as if an unseen army still marched beneath the stars. Travelers claimed to have seen a lone warrior, clad in armor blackened by age, standing atop the ruins of Zazzau's walls, watching, waiting. Those who dared to venture too close to her old battlegrounds often returned with wild tales, or never returned at all. One story, told by an old Hausa griot, speaks of a group of treasure hunters who sought to find Amina's lost tomb, believing it held riches beyond imagination. They followed clues, ancient texts, and oral legends deep into the wilderness, to a hidden valley where the ruins of an abandoned fortress lay in eerie silence. They entered. They never came out. The villagers who lived nearby said they heard screams echoing from the ruins that night, screams that did not belong to the living. And when a search party was sent the next morning, all that was found were scattered weapons and footprints that led nowhere, as if something had taken them, as if Queen Amina had never left. With Amina's disappearance, the empire of Zazzau slowly began to crumble. Without her iron fist holding it together, the territories she conquered began to break away, one by one, reclaiming their independence. The mighty walls she had built stood as lonely monuments to a power that had once seemed unshakable. The Hausa people continued to tell her story, but her legacy became twisted, split between admiration and fear. Some saw her as the greatest ruler of their time, a woman who had shattered expectations and built an empire with her own hands. Others whispered that she had been too ambitious, too ruthless, and that her own blood-stained hands had sealed her fate. Yet despite the mystery and myths that surround her, one thing remains certain. Amina of Zazzau was no ordinary ruler. She was the warrior queen who defied the rules of kings. She was the conqueror who chose death over defeat. And perhaps, even now, she is not done. To this day, historians, archaeologists, and seekers of lost truths continue to search for the final resting place of Queen Amina. But none have found her tomb, her remains, or even undeniable proof of her death. Perhaps she is buried beneath the ruins of a city she conquered, her spirit bound to the lands she fought for. Perhaps her body was taken by those who feared her return, hidden away so that no one could awaken the warrior who once brought kingdoms to their knees. Or perhaps, just perhaps, Queen Amina still rides. Somewhere beyond the veil of time, beyond the reach of history, she waits, waiting for the day when her empire will rise again, waiting for the moment when the world will tremble beneath her war drums once more. And when that day comes, will you be ready? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more updates. Paper.